in the country, and also at the far end is Philip, and Philip is the Youth Inclusion Advisor. Many thanks for being here, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Yeah, and let's begin with maybe what's happening this morning. We had the Azimio, the Kenya Kwanza team, coming to an agreement that indeed we are not going to have a conversation about personal interest, but about the interest of Kenyans. And what is coming up very clearly is the discussion on the high cost of living. Philip, beginning with you, what sort of conversations as a young person do you think it's important to address the issues affecting young people in Kenya today?
Very well, Purity. Many thanks for having me, and a good morning to our viewers. I'm really disturbed that the agenda set aside for the discussion from the government side, especially, does not resonate with what Azimio is proposing, which is pro-poor, pro-young people, pro-the forgotten bottom millions, and pro-Kenya. Now, just to take you briefly through what has been proposed by Azimio side, is that we are talking about accountability on police brutality, which is an issue that has risen out of government mating forces and controlled levels of brutality on young people, killing some 24 people just between Kisii and Kisumu counties in 3 days. And we are talking about the next thing, which is the cost of living, which has been a discussion ripe in Kenya and across our borders, taken by even international newsrooms. We are talking about electoral justice and ensuring that we have an audit of the past election issues that has caused all these governance problems that we have. We are talking about, again, inclusivity in government appointments, where you don't see a country of 42 communities having, 51 PSs out of the 51, 13 coming from just one ethnic construction. So these are issues that are fundamental towards making Kenya a more advanced nation, making Kenya a fairer place. But what I want to see more is that as we talk about police brutality, on those who have been killed, those who have been maimed and still in hospitals, those who have lost income out of, being disarmed and disabled by the police, what is the government doing on that response? But again, more fundamentally, is as we talk about inclusivity, we have a cabinet that has no youth at all representing the interest of young people who are the vast majority of up to 80% of our population. How do we make that as part of the interest of the young people? We know for a fact that the government is talking about entrenchment of the position of the office of the Prime Cabinet Secretary. We know who that is. It's not a young person. We know that the government is talking about bringing back the official opposition leader into our constitution and into our government framework. But what is the position of the young people? That's my big question. Yeah,
all right. And maybe the CEO for the Young Parliamentarians can answer that question. Most of the time when you talk about inclusion, we focus on gender, but in terms of age, looking at the inclusion referring to young people in the country, and let's even look at the technical committees for both sides, the Kenya Kwanza and the Azimio la Umoja One Kenya. As a young parliamentarian's CEO or boss, would you say that yes, the young parliamentarians are well represented in this table that will have an important conversation, of course, touching on matters, high cost of living and the leadership of the country?
Thank you, Purity, for having me. I really want to emphasize that youth inclusion should no longer be anything to consider an option, but actually the right thing to do. Because the statistics speak for themselves. Young people comprise over 75% of this country's population. Yeah. So exclusion of one young person is exclusion of almost 75% of Kenya's population. Yeah. Remember, these same young people are described as the demographic time bomb because of issues of unemployment. Yeah. Remember that we have a widening inequality gap that keeps coming up as we go, which means that, again, this particular group is secluded from important national issues. So if you bring all that together And then you now look at current political situation in our country. And speaking specifically to the whole concept of the bipartisan talks, the young people are the ones who are on the streets. They're the ones who have been arrested. I know, for example, Purity, when the protests were on, I received so many phone calls by people who know me, and they believe that I'm in a space of influence to intervene for their kids so that they get out of cells. And I was helpless because on one part the police are saying these people were found on the streets. So again, to come and witness a constitution of a bipartisan team that is supposed to address those issues that were being raised during the protest, and you have no young person.
For both sides, right?
For both sides, then that's when you begin to feel the frustration that the young people in Kenya go through. Because most of the time we are just used as a ladder for political actors to climb up to whatever heights they want. Then they forget that there are people who held the ladder for them. And the manifestation, the first manifestation of that is through the composition of such a bipartisan team. Because remember, youth have been agitating to fit in the negotiating table where decisions are made. And this is one such platform, because the outcome of these bipartisan talks, based on what was provided for, will directly have an impact on the livelihood of young people. If you are to, for example, create the position of an opposition leader, it means that it will have an implication, a financial implication on taxpayers. The majority of the population is young people, so you'd assume many of us would be paying that. Like Philip has correctly put, if you look even at the current composition of the executive, young people were left out, and in as much as it's at the discretion of the president to make his appointments, I feel like as a country we must now begin to be more sensitive. I like the government's proactive approach in opening up opportunities through the housing project. But you see, over and beyond that, young people want to see representation in key government positions. Because what that representation would mean is that I can tag you along because I know more about you. And Purity, I'm a beneficiary of first-hand experience on such things. There was a time the former President Uhuru made similar appointments, but he's extended all the way to parastatals and boards. And young people just came out gun blazing, and they were all over complaining. So when they approached us and they wanted us as young parliamentarians to do a press conference to critique the government. And coincidentally, as at that time, my chairman was the current governor of Nairobi, and he happened to have been serving as the chairman of TNA as at that time. So he was in a very difficult place, because on one part you are the chairman of the ruling party, on the other part you're playing a role as a legislator, leading a team of young legislators agitating for the space of young people. So he reached out proactively to the former president and requested him, why are you making all these appointments without bringing young people on board? And you remember that time TNA was purely elected on the platform of youth, but they were left out.
And what exactly happens, maybe Philip, what happens, like he painted a picture that during the Azimio protest, it was the young people that were out there agitating for their rights, high cost of living, unemployment and all that. But even for the Azimio team itself, we are not seeing the face of the young people. What happens after using young people? They are at the front line. They say they are energetic at the same time, but why are they left out most of the times during such important meetings or conversations?
I think our greatest challenge as a nation is lack of depth and lack of the ability just to comprehend issues and statistics for what they are. If you're told that you are suffering from a youth bulge, at the threshold for youth bulge is basically a population having more than 20% of its population, a country having more than 20% of its demographics being youth or below the age of 35. But we're talking about a country where in Kenya today, the median age is just shy out 20 years. Now, if as a policy holder, as a governance practitioner, and as an economic planner, you cannot make sense of what those numbers mean, especially in 5 years, in 10 years, then you are sitting on a crisis. And Purity, every other time this is described as a ticking time bomb. But what are you doing with the ticking time bomb? You are dancing around the ticking time bomb without knowing, with possible consequences that you already know, but not addressing them at all. In another 5 years or so, at the end of this decade, since our last census, we are going to have yet another 10 million people join the age bracket of the youth. That is people who are aged between 14 to 18 in the previous census. The crisis is with our politicians and our leaders who enjoy status quo and do not want to be accountable.
Yeah.
You must be accountable to what you say. If you say and promise that I'm going to appoint youth into cabinet, then that must take shape. If you say I'm going to create employment across board, you cannot come and backtrack and say, now today I'm only going to create employment in the housing sector. Simply what the president, for example, is doing is saying that all Kenyan young people are unskilled, because the people that are working in the housing sector are a majority unskilled, providing unskilled labor with a bit of semi-skilled, who are masons, carpenters, welders, and so forth. Now, as a country, we really need to go back and rethink our engagement with young people. And I post this as a challenge to our young people every day. Even on my own side of the opposition, we have to rethink how we engage with young people, because it can't be the young people demonstrating, being on the front and on arm's way, but when it's creation of boardroom negotiations, then they lack.
Yeah.
And this has taken shape even across Africa. Look at coups around Africa. They are, organized around the energies of young people who are working in the militaries and the forces that are toppling governments, so that we get out leadership that we think are not really good. But when the UN and the AU, for example, construct their negotiation teams, you will never see a young person as part of that composition.
Right.
So that thinking has to come from the international community, has to come to the continental level, it has to come to the local situation. And I dare challenge our leaders, both my leader, the former Prime Minister, the Right Honorable Raila Amolo Odinga, and the President, that let us live up to the reality that is facing the country today.
Yeah.
If it's about the youth bulge, it's about the crisis of young people being unemployed, let us see that in action, and let us see that in everything that we do on a daily basis. In fact, by this call alone, and by this happening in the month of youth action, because August is set aside for young people.
Yeah.
The 12th, like you said, was the International Youth Day, and we are having youth action until the end of the month, 31st of the month.
Yeah.
Let us see a rethinking of even the composition of the bipartisan teams where young people are going to be included.
Yeah.
And you'll even see the technical teams that have been appointed. Scrutinize it and see if we have representation.
Yeah, and with that already in place, the technical teams are in place and the talks are starting today. Do you think they are fully going to address the issues that especially are affecting young people in the country? Do you have any faith in the talks as a young person?
No, we'll give them the benefit of doubt, but it will not stretch up to the point where we had desired as young people.
Yeah.
They normally say if you're not on the negotiating table, you're on the menu.
Yeah.
We want to get out of the menu. We want to be part of the negotiating table. I think the previous composition was a better one, because we had this lady senator called Esi Okenyuri sitting there. And for once, we felt like young people had space there. The thinking of young people is fresh.
Yeah.
And that's why you'd notice that even in the recent protests, some of them who went out to the streets were somewhat genuine. They projected a conversation beyond the political norms. And them missing out on these bipartisan talks is really not a plus, it's a minus. And I am not persuaded that they will be able to comprehensively provide a projection of the state of affairs for young people without a young person on that table.
Yeah.
Because, they will be operating from their own imaginations that this is what young people are going through. But the owner of the shoe, the wearer, knows where it pinches.
Yeah.
I think and I believe that many young people understand that better. If you're talking about the cost of living, Every day, Purity, we are interacting with our brothers and sisters, you know, doing short messages saying, please help me out because I'm stuck.
Yeah.
Even those ones in the border sector. I was privileged to have been a candidate in the last election. I know for a fact that there are many people we worked with unsuccessfully in that election, and they are all looking up.
Yeah.
How can I be able to pick them from where we left?
Yeah.
And I honestly believe it's the role of the leaders of the day to do that. At the young parliamentarians level, we'll be eager because this process will ultimately transition into some legislative processes. So we are very keen monitoring every step of the way so that by the time it comes to Bunge, now that we know young people have been left out, we will have our guards on to make sure that if those issues do not have a reflection of the fate of young people in Kenya, we would be out there protesting against those resolutions. Because a time has come, Purity, we must stop misusing the young people. They cannot be only important when you need them on the streets. You know, we used to see even in Azimio rallies, the prominent faces all of a sudden during most of the protest rallies were young people. They were Okangos, you know, these new faces within the space. And it gave some hope to young people that actually we are beginning to get our space within the political equation. But now look at, you know, the critical part of that protest is the bipartisan talks. Where are those faces? In as much as they are perceived, whatever perception people create, you know, there are people who are saying you are not technical enough. But if I'm technical enough to get the attention of the country when I'm holding a microphone in a political rally, I think I am competent enough to sit in a table, express the same sentiments I was sharing in the podium. But that is missing out. That's the flavor that is missing out on the bipartisan talks. I like the conversations on what they have proposed, you know, like reorganizing our leadership structure is very fundamental, because again, issue of inclusivity is fundamental, but we must stretch it to also accommodate the whole concept of demographic. You know, other countries are really yearning to have a population that is high in terms of young people. Here, we are frustrating that population. If you go to Europe mainly, the country, you will find like most of them, the older folks are more than the younger ones. So they are really, their desire is if they could be able to tap on such energy and maximize on it. On this part of the world, we are abusing that energy, misusing it, putting them through street protest, and that's where the place is. But I also want to make a call on young people. You know, sometimes, and I think it's Martin Luther King who said that freedom will never be given voluntarily by the oppressor. The young people are the oppressed in all these equations, across board. And I'm not saying Azimio or Kenya Kwanza. They're oppressed because they are the soldiers who take the front row when they are championing for the older folks. But when these people arrive, they leave them out. You know, we must be able to rechange this narrative and begin to demand, prior to us going to the protest, it must be clear, this is the roadmap, so you understand what you're fighting for.
All right. And Philip, young people are not on the table, at least for these negotiation tables, but we are here having that conversation. What are some of the things, and they are watching, the members of the technical teams, what are some of the issues as a young person you feel that they should be at the front line even as they commence these negotiations today?
Well, Purity, let me begin by saying that the world is readjusting itself to accommodate young people and to ensure that in all spaces their voices are included. In April this year, the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, gave out what they called a policy brief on setting standards for young people engagement or meaningful engagement. What is the threshold? Today, if you ask me, for example, the UN women would tell you that they've projected that if the world and all stakeholders work collectively 17 times more in this decade than they've done in the past, then they'll realize equality and equity for women. So the aspect of gender inclusion and gender inclusivity or equality at that level is addressed in figures and facts. If you come to Kenya, we know, for example, that our threshold for gender is 2/3 of either sides. Now, we keep talking about meaningful youth engagement, and that's what every other person is going to refer to, even in the talks. How do we engage the youth? But so long as, for example, number one, the youth are not on the table and are not making the discussions, the agenda is silent.
Yeah.
So what we need to see, and what we've jointly requested for, is one, let us reconstruct the bipartisan committees. We don't care how much that time takes, but we must reconstruct them from both the Azimio side and from the government side, so that those who have been affected, those who are the majority voters, those who have lost their lives, those who have been excluded from government are on the table of discussions.
Yeah.
Secondly, we've talked about inclusion in appointment, in economic rights, in economic participation, and in fiscal allocations. Today, we are talking about 175 million allocated to Youth Enterprise Fund.
Right.
And you're talking about addressing the situation of unemployment in this country. Now, we have 290 constituencies in this country today. Okay? How would you distribute 175 million, which is supposed to be given at the constituency level among these constituencies?
Yeah.
It doesn't make economic sense. Now, we are talking about another 682 million in terms of Kenya Youth Employment Opportunities, which has now been renamed to Nyota. That is a drop in the ocean. So what we expect the talks to address in terms of moving forward is, why do we still have young people agitated, available, willing, and voluntarily participating in demos? For example, if we ask to do them today, is because of not being attached anywhere, not being provided for anywhere, not being engaged economically. So let us talk about economic engagement and pushing up the threshold on economic allocations. The same way, the energy that we've used about pushing for the housing levy, why don't we have a youth inclusivity fund pushed at the same threshold, pushed by the same energy, so that we have that involvement?
Right.
And we've talked about participation in government. We've called upon the president to appoint a young person, at least one or two from both genders, into cabinet. We've talked about creation of what we call the youth junior government advisors. Now, the role of junior government advisors is, just as they are claiming about the position of prime cabinet secretary, opposition leader, and all that, junior government advisors would be young people below the age of 35, seconded to ministries, departments, and agencies of government to oversight, one, implementation of the AGPO rule, which requires that 30% of government procurements goes to women, goes to the youth, and goes to persons with disability.
All right.
Now, the other thing that the junior government advisors would do is to work hand in hand in digitization of government opportunities at that level, so that inclusivity in terms of access to government opportunities is advanced. The third and the last, which is extremely important, is that ministries, government departments, and agencies keep on recruiting, but the recruitment does not take cognizance of youth inclusion, does not take cognizance of growth and continuity of those departments.
All right.
So as we retire the old generations, the junior government advisors are supposed to ensure that a majority of those who come in are actually young people, vibrant, decisive, and creative in terms of moving the country forward.
All right, let's take a break. And of course, when we return, International Youth Day celebrations were held on Saturday, that's August 12, and the theme this year was on the green skills for the youth. So we will be looking at some of the opportunities that the transitioning, climate action, and the regreening again presents to the young people as we fight for places in government.